Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. It's your boy, the interim champion of your heart, Jack Slack. Fight's Gone By, episode 21. I was going to say week 21, but it's been a while since I did one of these, because I've been on my deathbed. But I'm feeling a bit better now. I'm going to try and edit out all the coughs and splutters. I might leave in the odd phlegm cough every now and again, like Jim Cornette, just so you know it's legit. And I hope to make this triumphant return a little bit more triumphant than the other return that happened this weekend. But we'll talk about that in a second. In case you're wondering about old Slacky and where he's been, I think I told you a few weeks ago when my work rate dropped off massively. It was coming down to crunch time at work, and everything piles up towards the end of the year. Day I got off work, suddenly I become sick, get into bed, don't get out of it for days. So I didn't really get to enjoy my holiday very much. But, that's work. Still, I expect the same thing will happen next year, but, I've got at least a few months before that starts again, so I can get back to writing a little bit more regularly and hopefully putting more time into these podcasts. My sort of plan for the future, or at least the immediate future, is that I'm going to write 2 pieces a week, and I'm going to really put time into making the podcast and actually planning out what I'm going to do on each one. Maybe not this one, but in future, we're going to have some segments and stuff. So let's dive right into that UFC 207 thing. We'll go straight into the main event. I wrote an article about it from my sick bed, but the way I thought this one would play out would be that Ronda Rousey's best bet was just to walk through the right hands like she always had done. Nunez is always going to throw the right hand. The act of squaring up is what got so many other Rousey opponents caught and clinched. I figured if Rousey could take it, she'd be alright. If she couldn't, she wouldn't. I didn't see Nunez doing a particularly good job of moving laterally like Holly Holm did, denying the opportunities to clinch and so on. But in fairness to Nunez, she did a much better job of managing distance than I thought she would. Because I'd seen her against Miesha Tate, and she did make Tate fall short and counter jab and things like that. But Miesha Tate's striking is well, it's the same with everything in the women's bantamweight division. You're comparing everyone against a very weak field generally at the moment. It's only been in the UFC for about 3 years, so we're back at about 2005 levels of MMA there, because these women haven't been allowed to do it professionally for long. Nunez does really hit hard. The parallel I drew between Rousey and Nunez is that they both throw very hard right hands and they finish all their combinations with them. And they often can't recover from them or follow up from them. But Nunez hits so hard that it didn't really matter. Rousey walked straight forward, straight upright, miming the boxing stuff all through the introductions, and then just didn't do any of it in the actual fight. Got blasted, fight got waved off. Some people were even saying it was early, but these are the people who want to see someone on the ground taking more punches before the fight has stopped. I think you're well within your rights to stop the fight standing if people aren't actually defending themselves and are getting blasted. As much as it can annoy me, the whole painting this as just the Ronda Rousey thing, because Amanda Nunez deserves a ton of respect, and she's really likeable, actually. I quite enjoyed her in the interviews. Even though they did let her ramble for like 15 minutes at the end because they had to fill time. She just kept going. They were like, okay, keep talking. But she's a sweetie, her and her partner, and she said her partner's going to be the next big thing. I thought that was cool. Yeah, as much as this was the Ronda Rousey show in the lead up to it, and Nunez was very cool about that. She, I think she realised that if she's getting pay-per-view points, by all means make it the Ronda Rousey show. Make it as much the Ronda Rousey show as you want, and then she'll just be the woman who beat Ronda Rousey. And she did it so emphatically and so quickly that I think that's definitely going to help her. Because, Holly Holm became a surprising star after the Ronda Rousey win. And while I think that was a better scientific performance in terms of absolutely taking apart everything Rousey did, Nunez was much more impressive in that she smoked her in about 40 seconds. And that really appeals to fans. I mean, that was half of Rousey's appeal. You could watch the whole fight in a GIF the next morning on Reddit. But I keep saying as much as this was the Rousey show, I think the story of this and the story of Rousey's career is going to be the whole Edmond thing. I said this on Twitter, but I think that this is going to be remembered as one of the weirdest, almost creepiest stories in certainly combat sports since Team Foxcatcher. If you haven't seen Foxcatcher the film or Team Foxcatcher the documentary, or you weren't around at the time this was all going on. Basically, I can't even remember the name of the whatever the Wrestling America Federation is, but they let John DuPont run their team, or run the Schultz and whoever else was involved's team, because he was willing to pay for facilities and stuff. He didn't have any idea what he was doing, but they still let him basically run these guys' lives. But the reason the whole Edmond thing is so... we're going to get into amateur psychology here, and I don't want to be one of those guys who pretends that he knows what's going on inside people's heads, but Ronda Rousey is a fairly erratic person emotionally. I think we're safe to say that. Certainly she's been she's been brought up to be hyper-competitive by a hyper-competitive mother. Anyone who gets to a high level of any sport, there's probably a degree of what some people might call child abuse going on there. Not like physical abuse, but, making people train all their time and not having what most of us would call like a normal upbringing. For a super coach parent, they would call that making sacrifices, but a psychiatrist later in life might not. I think that's something that Ronda Rousey could benefit enormously from getting a sports psychiatrist or a sports psychologist, or whichever one of those is the correct term, because she has a lot of stuff going on in her head, and she gets very worked up about wins and losses and what people say. People joked about the list. I'm probably on the list. I wrote Killing the Queen, Ronda Rousey a year and a half ago, or whatever it was. But this whole Edmond thing is just absolutely bizarre. I mean, he's objectively... And I didn't like weighing in on this stuff because I didn't know very much about the guy at all. But I think at this point we can say objectively that he is not a good enough coach that she should be staying with him. Because this whole thing was played up as her taking a year out to like refocus and come back. But she didn't. She took a year out because she thought she could continue through with these movies that she'd signed contracts to do. And then the movie studios put them on hiatus because she can't act. And also because she'd lost, which... sort of takes the rub off her as a star, and then eventually the UFC coaxed her back with $3 million or whatever it was, probably more. Released payout of $3 million. If Ronda Rousey had been serious about coming back and had been training for a year, I think she'd have, if she'd have packed in training with Edmond, if she'd have gone to Jackson's or any high-level gym where she'd be training with respectable, I don't want to shit on Edmond's people because I don't know very many of them, but if she'd been sparring with people all the time, training with people all the time who are almost as good as her, or even people in her division, training with the competition does wonderful things for a fighter. But instead what happened was that it seemed like Ronda Rousey was just standing in front of Edmond playing on the mitts the entire time. And I think the mitts are a deceptive thing for a lot of fighters. Because everyone watches Floyd Mayweather on the mitts and they go, oh, he's fast. And Ricky Hatton very famously mocked him for that. But, the Mayweathers use that as a drill to work on his reactions and his, staying in position to do these things all the time. There's a difference between that and just going through the motions and standing and doing a pretty pattern. I mean, at that point, you're basically doing a kata or a, what are they called? Dongs? I don't know, in Korean. But basically, you're doing a form in two parts. You're doing partner exercises. And that's what she was doing with Edmond. She was going through the motions. She knew exactly when the stuff was coming back, and she'd do like her 2 slips and return with a left hook to the body, and then 80 more punches upstairs. And she's not getting anything out of that. And it's the same thing with her shadowboxing. Everyone rips the shit out of her shadowboxing. But her fighting has never been anything like her shadowboxing, and her fighting has never been anything like her mittwork, and her mittwork has never been anything like her shadowboxing. So she's doing these 3 things, and they're, nothing related to each other. I think Edmond is a huge part of why Ronda Rousey stopped growing, and then this fight was just a disaster. It was like BJ Penn... I always repeat this one, but one of my friends texted me during the BJ Penn Frankie Edgar 3 bout. He texted me just, why is BJ Penn mincing at this man? And it was because BJ Penn tried to learn something new, or rework something, and it just came out looking really weird. Ronda Rousey, I don't know what she tried to relearn, or what, even if she was trying to relearn it, or if she was just doing old stuff poorly, or took a whole load of time off or something, but she looked worse than ever. rigid, upright, numb to the punches coming at her, clocked by the first punch, stopped moving her head, and then the moves to the clinch were just appalling because she's working with a boxing coach, she's a judoka, there is no one bridging that middle ground. I mean, it's very well for me to rag on her about this, but you know, I'm not a world-class coach or anything like that, anything close. But you know, if you went to Randy Couture or whoever's training Mitch Gagnon or someone like that, those guys love the single collar tie. They love they love boxing into the clinch, and a lot of the time they don't even shoot. They don't shoot to takedowns. They just box into the clinch. And the difference between what they do and what Rousey, even at her best, did. Because I was talking about this, Rousey used to just take the right hand and walk into the clinch. There wasn't an awful lot of science to it. But in this fight, she was walking straight at Nunez, and she was eating the right hands, and if she couldn't get into the clinch after eating the right hand, she'd have to eat another right hand to attempt to do it again. So it compounds badly on her. But you watch guys like Mitch Gagnon, and they'll jab and they'll change level, and then they'll come up again, or they'll change level, get in on the hips, and then stand up into the clinch from that position. You know, there's half a dozen great ways to enter that position. Even the Nate Diaz bull guard. Put your elbows up really high, forearms shielding your head in a little cage, pull your chin way down, and just walk forward. Even that is better than just taking the right hands on the face. And the world loves it when Ronda Rousey loses. I was very critical of her back in the day because people, firstly, I just hate hyperbole so much. But I've never really understood this sort of glee in her losing. I mean, she's not a very likable person, but she's also not a very media-friendly person. She's obviously got a lot of stuff going on in her head. She's been through a lot of rough stuff. The suicide of her father. If we return to amateur psychiatrists, sorry, I keep getting those two confused. One takes a medical degree, that's the important thing. Edmond famously refused to even bother with her first few months at his gym until she started becoming famous. That sounds a lot like father issues if you're staying with that guy because he ignored you and now he likes you. I think Ronda Rousey has all the potential in the world. I mean, famously her knees are knackered, so she has a limited ability to kick and shoot and things like that. But I think if she went to any other camp in the world, they'd have her boxing into the clinch well. And from there, she's actually dangerous. But when she's just got one hand like loosely behind your head and you're able to push her off, not really a problem. I mean, I'm not writing a post-fight article about this, and I have rambled on about it too long already, I think, for what the fight was. Frankly, all that really remains is to wonder what Rousey's doing next. Everyone's convinced she's done, but what else is she going to do? I mean, $3 million is a lot of money, but if half of that goes on tax... Actually, did they fight in Nevada? It depends where they fought, how much of that goes on tax, but living on that for a while, probably a lot more difficult than you'd expect, in terms of these people... Fighters especially get huge sums of money and spend them away without any real consideration of what they're doing. If you're a fighter and you are due a big payday, get a financial advisor. That's like rule number one should be for fighters. Because the fighter getting slated by the IRS is the oldest tale in the book. But if Rousey actually wanted to come back to fight, I think if she leaves Edmond and she actually if she took another year but actually trained through that year, or 6 or 7 months at a world-class camp. She's in California, there's hundreds of good gyms around there that she could be training at. She could go back to the higher stand people. She could go over to Cesar Gracie. She could go, there's so many camps that, it would be no issue for her to go and train at. But she's consciously choosing to handcuff herself to the Glendale Fight Club and to Edmond. Anyway, I don't have much more to say about that fight. Let's move on to what was actually the performance of the night and one of the performances of the year. I'm always careful about saying performance of the year this close to the end of the year because you always remember the last thing as the most colourfully. But Cody Garbrandt versus Dominic Cruz was one of the best performances I've seen in a very long time. I had very low expectations on Cody Garbrandt coming in. I'm going to admit that right up front. I didn't even write an article for this one because there was so little footage of him to go on. He had a fairly underwhelming fight against Marcus Brimage. He smoked a few guys straight off the bat. And none of it was really an indication of what he could do against a guy who is built for 5-round fights where he controls the pace and creates long periods of inactivity between his engagements on his terms. I figured Garbrandt would come out strong, maybe knock him down, and then fade over the distance very quickly. as it turned out, this guy who we all had down as sort of a machismo-y, maybe a bit emotional kind of guy, came out, well, especially since he walked out of that press conference. Everyone was, he's in his head, blah, blah, blah. And he came in and he fought like he wasn't even bothered. He fought a beautiful game plan and so thoughtful and measured and conservative, but opening up at exactly the right times. And to do that all against a guy as good as Dominic Cruz, just astounding. I could now put him in the running for a Fighter of the Year quite comfortably, based on his rise from nothingness to the title. But the interesting thing about this fight is that it really reflects the nature of the fight game and the nature of problem solving in the fight game. The example I used in my article was, if someone's got a reach advantage on you, you can try and press through that reach advantage, either by getting your guard up high or moving your head and trying to get under it and then in close so that you're in punching range for yourself. Or you can try and have them come to you and then step in on them when they do lead, thereby taking away that reach advantage again. Two different ways to do the same thing. But in this instance, we were, a lot of us, especially me, basically because I love ring cutting, and there isn't very much good ring cutting going on in mixed martial arts. But, if you watch someone like TJ Dillashaw trying to take the fight to Dominic Cruz, it was very hard for him because he couldn't really cut the cage that well. TJ Dillashaw is like Dominic Cruz. I don't like comparing them too much because there's a lot of differences in the way they approach things, but both of them like being the guy drawing the opponent forward. Both of them like being the matador rather than the bull. So I figured we needed a really good bull, and what Cody Garbrandt turned out to be was a guy who could make Dominic Cruz the bull, which was really interesting to watch. A lot of what Dominic Cruz does is walk off on 45s because his opponent is normally either slowly advancing on him or standing still and waiting to counter. Whereas every time he took a step at Cody Garbrandt would take a little step backwards. Not like a run, never made it very clear that he didn't want anything to do with Cruz, but he'd just take a little step backwards and Cruz would fall short, or, he'd step in again afterwards. And it was essentially what Machida does, or Machida did, rather, back in the day, forcing the guy to take that extra step. If he assumes you're not going to be there as soon as he moves, he starts trying to anticipate where you're going to be. He starts stepping through where you actually are if you choose to stop and throw back. Now, Dominic Cruz's striking style, it's one of those ones that this fight has got people coming out of the woodwork going, well, it's because his boxing shit. You can get away with that flashy swinging shit against people who don't know how to box, but if you blah, 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 blah. And Cody Garbrandt's boxing, don't get me wrong, big factor in this fight, but Dominic Cruz is, if Cody Garbrandt had gone after Dominic Cruz, I think it would have worked out exactly the opposite way. I think we would now be talking about what a great title defense Dominic Cruz put on. Dominic Cruz's choices regarding like low hands, deep slips, and things like that don't make much difference when his opponent is moving towards him and he's controlling the distance. When they did make a difference was when he overstepped, and Cody Garbrandt would slip or duck low, and Dominic Cruz was then right on top of him. And Cruz is swinging with one hand down and his head way up in the air, and Garbrandt's throwing off clipped hooks and moving his head like a guy who knows how to box. Dominic Cruz's fighting is for a longer distance than Cody Garbrandt's. If you watch him throw those long, I jokingly called them drying pole hooks once, and some guy got really butthurt like I'd invented a term just to be like a buzz term. It was a reference to the famous swordsman Sasaki Kajiro, who had a very long sword. But, if you don't know your Japanese swordsman, what am I going to tell you about? Anyway, so Dominic Cruz throws these long old hooks right on the end of his reach with his fist turned all the way over. And what they do really well is that they catch guys right on the end of his reach with blows coming from the side. And he can do that really well when he's controlling the distance and they're walking towards him. Did it a lot against TJ Dillashaw. In fact, landed them more against TJ Dillashaw than I'd ever seen him land them before. A lot of the time they just whiff when the other guy stops walking towards him. But when he was on top of Cody Garbrandt and throwing like that, it was just long straight swings with the other hand low, which was just full of holes for a guy who has a nice boxing counterpunching game. And you'll notice that every time Dom got planted, except for a couple of got caught and countered with the right hands, every time he got planted properly, it was when he lunged in on Cody Garbrandt, expecting him not to be there. And Cody Garbrandt ducked under and came up with one of the hooks. And at no point did Cody Garbrandt ever get called into coming forwards. You know, I think it was the 4th round, Cruz knew that he wanted Garbrandt to come to him, and he starts trying to goad him on, and Garbrandt's having none of it because he's already up on the cards. It's that Anderson Silva thing, you know, he's not great at leading, but if he's already up on the cards, you can't convince him to lead by asking him to lead. He can just say, nope, I'm going to walk away now. We were talking about what an unknown Cody Garbrandt is, but consider this, you know, he had not defended a single takedown in his UFC career. That's how unknown he was. And then he did a beautiful reversal of Dominic Cruz's takedown in the first round, came up on the front headlock, and Dominic Cruz almost hit a really nice sucker drag, which is basically an arm drag off the front headlock. Didn't quite get to Garbrandt's back, but it was a really nice little sequence. And then late in the first round, Cruz is coming after him with punches, and Garbrandt slips a punch and ducks in immediately underneath, having been backing up. And it looked like something straight out of the Faber versus Cruz fights. A couple of weird little things that I saw in Cody Garbrandt. He's now added a front leg snap kick to his arsenal, which, you know, I'm never going to complain about, but it just seemed like a really weird thing for the boxer wrestler to pick up, you know, that semi-shilt sort of step-up front kick. He landed it a couple of times, which was impressive. In fact, he was doing an interesting thing where he'd step back as Cruz advanced. So he'd shift back into a southpaw stance, and then he'd throw the front kick with the left foot. So that was interesting. A cool note about Cody Garbrandt's guard. You'll notice that his hands are very rarely upright. They're always pointing at his opponent. If you imagine, in fact, read Sugar Ray Robinson's autobiography, because it's a fun one. And he makes reference to a number of like old timers in his gym growing up who gave him like little pieces of advice, and one of them was called Soldier. Oh god, I can't remember his name. Like, he wasn't a particularly important boxer, but he gave Sugar Ray this piece of advice. He said, use the mirror, it's your best training tool. Stand in front of it, and you want to be able to see down the barrels of your guns at both times, and at all times, and that means you want to be able to see the fronts of your fists. Which is a strange thing to consider when you consider that next to like a Dutch kickboxing style where the forearms are upright, ready to catch things. But what it does is it makes your jab straight to the target. You know, if your forearms are upright and you start jabbing, the angle of the guy you're against sees a huge telegraph when he starts to see the front of your fist. Whereas if your fist's already pointing at him and it just extends, you can sometimes catch him off guard. Cody Garbrandt's jab turned up like twice in this fight, but it was beautiful. It's one of the most annoying jabs in MMA because it's really crisp, but he barely ever throws it. It was really nice when he did it. He drew Cruz forward and then popped him in the face as he was walking onto it. Cruz's jab is actually quite underrated. It was one of the most successful techniques against Faber, even though he likes to focus on all the walking flurries and the darts and things. He's very good at jabbing from like feet level going into the jab. I mean, the other thing I took away from this, and I was tweeting this at the time, Dominic Cruz is tough as nails. He does sometimes seem like he's got a chip on his shoulder. We famously had a sort of spat where he got angry because I said TJ Dillashaw was probably the best guy he's ever fought, and it will be a tricky fight. And then, of course, he proved me wrong by winning that dominant knockout victory. I'm just kidding. No, I have no hard feelings to Dominic Cruz at all. He's an awesome guy, and I really admire him. And this fight just cemented that to me. He was dropped in, was it the fourth, the really bad one where he got dropped, and it looked like he was on the verge of being knocked out. And he just got back up and went right back to it. He wasn't even trying to survive. He was just like, right, got to get back to this now. And, you know, a lot of people, especially a guy who isn't known for finishing fights and has no late finishes or like turnaround victories, probably would have given up then and just focused on like moving around and surviving. But he was going after Cody Garbrandt. You know, if the world doesn't believe that he could knock Cody Garbrandt out in the last few minutes, he certainly didn't know about it. You know, he was trying. And then his attitude after the fight was really refreshing. You know, he had no excuses to make. He said, you know, this is my loss. I think Cody did great and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it was just a really inspiring attitude towards that stuff. I don't know if it'll be like that in several months' time if they ever book the rematch, you know, when he starts saying, oh, you know, I was ill or something like that. But his attitude towards this was really refreshing. The other thing that I really want to pick up on when we're talking about boxing is the developments in boxing, like the high non-punching hand and head movement. Those are all developed for the mid-range, which is, you know, the range when your right hand can touch the other guy's chin, as Jack Dempsey said. And he said if you're in that range, you should always be throwing punches. which is how you know you're in that range. Basically, all of that stuff is built to be safe or safer in a range where both of you are punching. If you look at earlier boxing, it's a lot more in and outy, it's a lot more dancey, it's a lot more long jabby, and it's a lot more hands downy, because guys weren't really aware of that middle range, or, it wasn't quite built into a science yet. The thing about boxing that is hard, the difference between a really experienced boxer, be it amateur or professional, and someone who trains a lot of different martial arts and things like that, is that comfort in middle range, always moving the head, reacting to punches, and having the ability to react to punches at that very short window. And that's the stuff that really, once you start getting older, and your reactions start slowing down and things like that, those are really affected by age, that sort of stuff at that range. And also they're honed over a lifetime, A guy like Floyd Mayweather has hundreds of amateur rounds and, thousands of rounds in the gym. And that's the difference between him working the mitts and going through those motions, and Ronda Rousey working the mitts and standing right in front of Edmond and working those motions. Floyd Mayweather is going through motions that he's practicing or has practiced in sparring thousands of times before. And Ronda Rousey's going through these motions and then not doing much of the sparring. Boxing is certainly at that distance, is a game of tiny windows. And Cody Garbrandt had a good degree of comfort in that sort of range, and Dominic Cruz is much better at controlling the range and keeping right out on the distance. And there's no one style of fighting that is right. It's just that one man was much more comfortable in the kitchen than the other. And that was Cody's genius in this fight. He manufactured the fight that favoured him. And that's what Killing the King is all about. Taking away the A game and making them fight their B game. And if you can make their B game, match up with your A game, that's even better. There were some other decent fights on the UFC 207 card. TJ Dillashaw looked absolutely fantastic in taking apart John Lineker. Couple of old Dillashaw habits showed up. His habit to get his kicks caught, throwing them naked and then getting bundled over. But his takedowns were absolutely on point, boxed into perfect position to perform them. Loves that double leg shot with the trip, with the hooked leg behind the lead leg. I think that's my favourite double leg too. But that's a very jiu-jitsu-y thing. And Genki Sudo, his old favourite. He even went for a calf slicer, a rolling calf slicer, from the truck in the final round. Very impressive stuff. Yeah, inspired me to do a pro wrestling article, which I think I'll do next week. About, well, I'll tell you about it at the time. Yeah, just a really good fight, and apparently he broke his jaw with a high kick in the first round, and Lineker just kept going and taking blows on the chin. But really, what it showed up in Lineker was that a lot of his takedown defense is just grabbing hold of the guillotine, and if the takedowns are really well set up, it makes it very hard to do that. There was a lovely slap of the lead leg and uppercut straight up the centre as Lineker withdrew his leg expecting a takedown attempt in the first round. Loved that. And then the usual V-steps and the Dillashaw stuff that we're all familiar with, but all love watching anyway. So that puts Dillashaw in an interesting position because him versus Garbrandt would be a fantastic fight. Him versus Cruz 2 would still draw a huge amount of interest from fans, even as a non-title fight, provided it was 5 rounds, of course. Not much point having those two fight for 3 rounds. Elsewhere in the world of MMA this weekend, Rising put on 2 events, and I really enjoyed them, actually. I haven't quite finished catching up on Rising 4, but Rising 3 was good fun. I've watched all of Cro Cop's fights. I was mainly surprised that he got by King Mo. I thought that would be the hard one. The interesting thing about this was that it showed, once again, Cro Cop's issue was never that he couldn't wrestle or anything like that. His wrestling has always been bang on point. That was something that he took to with remarkable proficiency from day one. Cro Cop wasn't a guy who used his elusive footwork to stop people from taking him down. He was one of those guys who went forward, punched you as hard as he could, and then when you ducked under and tried to get in on his hips, he'd actively sprawl and fight for underhooks and things. And the fact that he could do that to people like Mark Coleman, even old man Coleman, there's great photos of him turning up at Jackson's to spar with John Jones and ragdolling him. The guy was an incredible wrestler, and Crow Cop had no trouble with him at all. Crow Cop's issues in later years were that he was slowing down a lot on the feet. His reactions were slowing, and he couldn't wing up the kicks like he used to, and his chin just wasn't holding up to the shots. You know, I always reference the fight with Roy Nelson. I thought he looked fantastic in that, the best he'd looked in years, movement-wise. But every time he got clipped, his legs went. But if you turn up and all you're going to try and do is wrestle against Crow Cop, you're going to get beat up, which is exactly what happened to King Mo. And then there was a nice... Crow Cop has not aged gracefully as a fighter, but there have been a couple of times where I've been really impressed by him adapting to his loss of speed and the loss of the abilities that he used to use to win fights. So in Glory and K1, in his return there after the UFC, he did a lot of holding and hitting. He'd hold behind the head and punch. And while that was technically illegal, the referees very rarely called it. And it was a great way of him sort of protecting himself from his opponent's punches, landing some of his own, and turning it almost into an MMA match where they weren't quite as experienced as him. And in this fight, there was another nice little show of savvy. Every time Crow Cop stopped while he was circling the ring to stay away from King Mo, he looked like he was loading up a cumbersome high kick, because they're so slow nowadays compared to what they were. And he did that, and as soon as Mo got into position to block the high kick, he threw a body kick underneath. It was just beautiful timing. It showed that you don't need to be on a hair trigger all the time as a offensive striker. You only really need to work to the speed of your opponent and make him react, and then time those reactions, as opposed to race to get your strike through first. Burrito fought Crow Cop in the first part of, the semi-final on Rising 4. And I'd written a little bit about Burrito because I was actually pleasantly surprised. I mean, he is sort of the classic freak show style fighter for a Japanese MMA promotion. But the thing about him is that he isn't an Akabono or an Emmanuel Yarbrough. You know, Emmanuel Yarbrough wasn't a very good sumo. He was just a big fat guy who then got into sumo because someone said, "Oh, you're fat, get into sumo." And Akabono was a ferocious sumo, but he basically got by on palm striking dudes and being 6'8". I keep saying sumo, I mean Rikishi, of course. And by the time he came over to things like kickboxing, he was just desperate for a paycheck. You know, he was a shambles of his former self. Whereas Burrito retired from sumo very, very young for a wrestler. And he had like mounting injuries, and he'd actually been changing his style. He used to fight heavy on the belt grip, the Mawashi grip, or whatever you want to call it, and he had some injuries to his fingers and thumbs, so he started playing more with just the underhook and things like that, and more towards a pushing style rather than a throwing style. So he was really interesting in that respect, in that he had to make adaptations due to injuries and things. But he stopped sumo very young, and it genuinely seemed hungry to compete when he came to Rising. His fights weren't entertaining, but he's a 400-pound man, and he's 6'6". You know, they put him in with Crow Cop, and even without the belly, he looked. If you cut the belly off, you know, he looks gigantic. He's a very tall guy, and in his fights, I've been surprised at him not gassing. He's been very good at keeping the pace, and there are guys who, in the heavyweight division, can lay on a guy for 5 minutes and get exhausted from doing that. You know, Burrito's actually wrestling with guys, taking them down. And it's not pretty, but he was managing to, not be gasping for air by the end. And Joe Warren was awful on commentary, but even he pointed this out. He was impressed by the conditioning of Burrito, which opens its own interesting questions, because at a certain size, you can't run. Like, it's really bad for your joints to do that. You know, pounding the pavement with 400 pounds of weight on your knee joints. So it makes you wonder how he stays in such incredible shape. Not incredible shape, but, in good condition. Anyway, second round, he takes on Crow Cop. What he'd been doing had been bull rushing people to the clinch and then dragging them down from there. But against Crow Cop, very good at stopping takedowns, and he managed to sneak through a good few knees. And it was just the sort of strike that, in his 3 fights, Burrito would not have taken before. And he went down. Crow Cop got the win. And then Crow Cop took on Amir, whatever his name is. Decent wrestler, but again, like a 5-0 record or something like that. This was one of those tournaments. In fact, this was a lot like the K1 tournament that Crow Cop won. It was sort of like all the best guys had already dropped out. in the K1 tournament, it was Zabit, Thingy, and Badr Hari, and Harry broke his foot, and then Zabit also was injured, and all sorts of other stuff. And then it turned out that the final was Ismail Lont, and Ismail Lont is now he's ranked in the top 5 in the world, but he's not a great fighter. Certainly not a Badr Hari or a Zabit Thingy at that time. And then this tournament, we were supposed to have Wanderlei Silva and Shane Carwin in the opening round, and just neither of those happened. So in terms of entertainment, I mean, it wasn't a particularly interesting tournament, but it was nice to see Cro Cop pick up the win, and he actually had the chance to retire, picking up the tournament win again, because the K1 one would have been a perfect time to retire, and he didn't. But he actually says he's retiring now, and this is a really nice ending to the Cro Cop story. Gabby Garcia beat up some old woman, and remember that this is the second old woman that they could find her. They tried to find her a worse one, and then that one pulled out. This woman's main achievement was fighting Amanda Lucas when they needed someone to lose to Amanda Lucas. Gabby Garcia, I don't know what they're going to do with her, because it's not like a Bob Sapp figure where you're going to eventually have them fight a skilled fighter. They don't have any good, women who would be able to fight her on staff. And surely people can't care that much. She doesn't fight well. It's not good to watch. So God knows what they're doing there. And then World Series of Fighting attempted their own New Year's Eve thing in the smallest segment of Madison Square Garden or whatever it is, which I wanted to start a segment called Jack Slack's Business School. I'm not a great businessman, but I've seen a few episodes of The Apprentice, the English Apprentice, not the American Apprentice. And I think what I'm going to start doing is, they always talk about how Steve Jobs was an ideas man, and I think I want to be like an anti-ideas man. I'll just sit in the corner of a boardroom, and I'll be, reading a paper or a book about some kind of old boxer or something like that. And when someone comes in and says, I want to do a New Year's Eve event in New York, they'll look over to me, and I'll look over the top of my paper and I'll go, no, why would you do that? Because this was just a dreadful idea. The New Year's Eve thing in the West has just never caught on. It's a tradition in Japan to sit at home and watch TV on New Year's Eve, which is why they have, if you look down the list of most watched fights ever, it's all things on New Year's Eve in Japan. Kid Yamamoto beating up some Olympic wrestler who'd never had a fight got 26 million viewers. Akabono versus Bob Sapp is the most watched fight ever with something like 54 million viewers. It's just insane the number of people who stay home and watch TV in Tokyo, or go out and watch a fight in Tokyo. Sorry, Japan generally. That isn't a thing in the West. What World Series of Fighting, and before that Cage Warriors, did was that they tried to make a night of fights on the one night of the year where people will be doing literally anything else. Everywhere has a New Year's Eve thing going on. And if you're a real fight fan, chances are you've probably got either a girlfriend or friends who aren't fight fans who want you to be somewhere else. So there are all sorts of rumours about them only selling 400 tickets before this event started. But I don't know what the actual numbers are. But they're supposedly not in great financial position anyway. And as a big idea to sort of save the brand, this was not a great one. But, you had Marlon Moraes and Justin Gaethje on the card, and they are both tremendous fighters. And the one thing that's, I love World Series of Fighting, even though this was really stupid, but the great thing about World Series of Fighting folding would be that Justin Gaethje, Marlon Moraes, and Dave Branch would all end up in maybe the UFC or at least Bellator. That's enough ranting about New Year's Eve events. Let's go to the Facebook thread for some questions this week. Darren asks, how do you think Jose Aldo matches up with Khabib, considering Aldo's takedown defense is some of the best in the business? In relation to current rumours of Aldo moving up. Oh God, Aldo's been threatening to move up for the best part of a decade. I wouldn't look into it too much. But that is a really interesting matchup because Khabib really, as brilliant as he is on the ground and in the clinch, he does also rely on his strength a lot. He if you watched his first shot on Michael Johnson, he shoots with no setup. Johnson sprawls, front headlock, And then Khabib basically just bear walks right up into him and pushes him onto the fence and then trips him from there. He's an enormously strong guy. And the interesting thing about that is that Aldo, obviously as strong as a professional fighter is going to be, but he's very technical. He's very technical in his takedown defense. He almost always feeds that single, really drops into the long stance as guys shooting on him and gives them the lead leg, and then attempts to put the dog collar on and slide him down that leg and limp leg out. The interesting thing about it is that Michael Johnson was lighting Khabib up by getting to work early and then making sure he was out of range of takedowns. Jose Aldo's typical game has always been to deny the takedowns and then sit on the back foot and counter the guy. And I think countering against Khabib is more giving him the chance to start piling in with the wrestling and stuff like that. I think what you want against Khabib is a guy who knows how to defend the takedowns and is strong enough to do it, but you also want a guy who's going to push every advantage every moment that it's on the feet. You want a guy who's throwing those punches in Khabib's face all the time when Khabib isn't shooting. Whereas Aldo, with the exception of the brain fart in the McGregor fight, always very conservative, sits back, lets the other guy come to him, takes rounds to build up his lead. And then, of course, when Aldo has been taken down, he's so quick to get back up. It'd be very interesting to see what Khabib could do about that. But then Khabib has been amazing at plucking out people's arms as they try and perform a technical stand-up or get up along the fence and stuffing it behind their back, and then that's when he starts wailing on them with that ground and pound. Mitch asks, what are your thoughts on the rumoured rise in Women's Grand Prix next year? I hadn't heard anything about it, and having heard about it now, I'm not going to watch it. No, it'll be part of a Rising event, I'll watch it, but I can't. I mean, who are they going to have in it? They got Rena, who's great, but really inexperienced. Yeah, well, see what they do. TJ versus Garbrandt, break down that fight, please, because there's a big chance of it happening, thanks. No, you're going to have to wait for that. With Dillashaw's luck, they probably won't even let him have the fight. Nathan says, when should a fighter leave their camp? I'm thinking about Rousey here. It's interesting because on the one end of the equation, you have guys like Conor McGregor who are very keen on staying to their roots and where they came from. And on the other hand, you have people like Ronda Rousey who find this one person and continue to hold on to them even when it's clearly not helping. Certainly, lots of guys have benefited from a move of camps. I think really you need to look at the specific camp you want to move to rather than thinking that a general change of camp is going to do you good. I think a fighter should be looking at which team's style and philosophies match up well with what they can do. Oh, Jesper asks, best depiction of boxing in movies? I am partial to Ali, having James Toney as Frazier and Will Smith having trained for like a year or something. Ali's a good fun movie, actually. That's probably the most I've ever liked Will Smith. And James Toney turning up in a bit part is fun. A lot of boxing in the movies is terrible. Like Raging Bull is a brilliant film, but the boxing in it is absolutely atrocious. The fighting in Rocky is always terrible. The thing about Rocky is that it's not a boxing story, it's a poverty story. The first one at least, and then it suddenly becomes a superhero story as you go from 2 to God knows whatever on now, 10. I was very impressed with what they did with Creed, that last fight scene, because what they did was exploit everything that you don't want to see in the filming of a professional fight. We always say if the camera's behind one person, it's obscuring the action, and that's bad in a professional fight if you're showing it on TV. But in a boxing scene in a movie, when the camera moves behind one person, that's a perfect time to have to hide the fact that the punch isn't connecting. You can see this in those ridiculous fake pranks in the hood videos where they'll line everything up perfectly so it looks like some guy got punched in the face when they didn't. It's just a load of guys faking it. I haven't seen the Daniel Day-Lewis film about being a boxer, but apparently he was getting really good at boxing when they filmed that, and he's the greatest actor of all time, so I imagine that's pretty good. Forget Ronda, what about Amanda? Now that Holly has got up a weight class, who has a hope in hell of giving her a good fight? From Michael, did you see her Kat Zingano fight or the Shevchenko fight? We're retconning people to be unstoppable monsters now. No, she lit up Misha and Ronda, but she'd had a lot of hard fights before that, and she has a real notable tendency to fade in the later rounds. I love Amanda Nunez, but let's not get on the same train that we did with Ronda and ruin it for everyone. Jacob says, there is a weird misconception in parts of Western culture that Eastern traditional martial arts are far superior to anything the West can offer, and are almost, or even literally, magical in nature. This view is perpetuated by movies, etc. How did this come to be? Was it because at some point in history it was true? ? Brackets, the superior part, not the magical part. I think there's a bit of this even today, Eat, Pray, Love. I was watching that Hector and the Pursuit of Happiness, or whatever the film is, with Simon Pegg, and I enjoyed it, but it is that thing where if I go and stand next to some poor Easterner, I will work out what's wrong with my life and I'll feel very spiritual. Asian people are a little bit more magical than Western people. I always wonder if they do it in the reverse. There's people over in Asia being like, I should go to New York and stand next to a yellow cab driver, or go to the Vatican or something. I think it's because in the 60s and 70s, Asia was very much exotic, and I think the movies helped, and things like Bruce Lee. First, also there isn't a lot of kicking in traditional Western martial arts, in terms of, we like boxing and wrestling. Savate was a big deal in France, but nobody else really gave a shit about it. And when they brought over karate and kung fu, you had kicking, which is interesting. And when you add flared genes to that, it becomes a lot more interesting. But the mysticism of other cultures is a thing anyway, and especially with the Bruce Lee stuff, Chinese people were always portrayed as very negatively in movies, and Bruce Lee had a big thing about that, and wanted to only play roles where they were portrayed respectfully. But you can go the other way and be like, oh, it's very mystical over there, and we'll have the spiritual wise man tell you some inner wisdom or some shit like that. There's a whole subset of Japanese martial artists who basically go around the world putting on seminars because they're Japanese, and that's like their main authority thing. There are a great many better karateka around the world than many of the Japanese ones that are coming out nowadays. Now that they don't have a monopoly on it. But the Japanese guys can still use the Japanese lineage as a way to keep their meal ticket. Is TJ Dillashaw improved from the last time he faced Cruz? Could he beat him this time? What are the odds against this sensational Garbrandt? Don't know what the last part means, but we haven't seen anything from Dillashaw in the area that he was trying to fight against Cruz. The ring cutting and stuff like that. But I think if he could draw Cruz forward, if he could learn from Garbrandt's fight, he could certainly fight a different fight. And the first one was close, so he could easily take it in the second if he fought the right fight and Cruz didn't fight the right fight. C. Greg says achieving angles from the outside without the opponent being able to keep readjusting. Not really a question, but I'm assuming you're asking how to do that. No, angling involves being close enough that you can actually get out the side door and the person is still facing one way, which means they're coming onto you or you've got in close. Generally, if you're moving around someone and they're turning is good enough anyway, because if you're turning a guy, he's on one foot, he can't hit hard while he's doing it generally. Getting a dominant angle on someone who is alert and not tired and a good fighter is very tricky. The value of the angles normally comes in getting to the angle and then them turning to face you and you hitting them while they do that. The idea that you're going to step offline and get the perfect right hand over the blind angle over the shoulder, not really going to happen unless they're knackered or overcommitted or just doing something that they shouldn't be. Ultimatus, nice Jewish name, says, is there a fighter it annoys you to watch? Someone who is so unskilled it bothers you? No. I mean, if you've got a realistic assessment of what you're watching, it's fine. It's listening to hyperbole, and the Ronda Rousey one was really bad. And God, people are doing it now with Amanda Nunez. People are doing it with Shevchenko since the Holly Holm win, which is crazy. I see people online picking her by KO in every fight. Like, it's just unquestionable. And you're like, who has she knocked out? Except people from the Peruvian circuit. I think that's the nice thing about this year in terms of every dominant fighter losing their title. We now have this sort of anything can happen state of affairs. I mean, it'll wear off as soon as someone's got like 2 title defenses. But, you know, the idea that someone has defended a belt a few times so they're unbeatable, it just really gets on my wick. And the idea that because someone has a belt, they're now unbeatable is just even weirder. And having to pretend that the absolute lightest weight class is going to be the most skilled fighters in the world, when, you know, that more so it's the classes that have the most people in, like lightweight and welterweight, that tend to have the more skilled competitors, just by having that massive depth of field. Do you think Aldo versus Garbrandt would happen? How do you see that fight going down? I don't think Aldo's ever getting to 135, so Garbrandt would have to go up to 145. I think with WME realizing that they need as many titles as possible and as many title holders to sell all these pay-per-views and stuff, I think we're going to see, it's going to be a long time before we see another guy challenging for a second title, just because it doesn't really, for the reasons that they never used to do it in the first place, it makes it very complicated when you're taking one title out of circulation, basically, for half the time. But I would love to see Garbrandt in against someone with really good kicks, really good low kicks. I think that would be very tricky for him. If traditional martial arts are about smaller man overcoming the larger man, do you think weight classes hold back the growth of martial arts? No, not at all. Because the smaller man overcoming the larger man is a marketing thing. The real thing about martial arts is that you want to get the most out of your strength, and it's not about not using strength and size, it's about getting the most out of them, using leverage in the right way, that you're getting the most out of everything that you've got. So a well-trained big man against a well-trained small man, never going to be a fight where the small man wins. If this was an open weight game, we wouldn't have half the guys who are objectively more skilled than a lot of the big guys. I would say that I do appreciate guys entering absolute brackets at grappling competitions and things like that, and of course train with whoever you can. It's always good to be able to overcome these things in training, or work out how you would go about overcoming them. How do you safely exit after throwing a long rear uppercut? Don't. That's the most dangerous punch, and it's really a specialist skill. I mean, if you watch guys like Cub Swanson, he used to throw that all the time, and it's also been responsible for him getting caught a lot of the time. He throws it against Frankie Edgar and is immediately countered and taken down, and then he does it again like 2 rounds later, and the same thing happens. From Milos, was Rousey always this bad? No, I think she did look really bad in this fight. I think, we remember her with her awful shadowboxing and stuff, but she was never that awful, Can we get some more Wushu watch? Now I've got some time, sure thing. Will we ever get that Ringcraft video about Rousey? Probably not. I might leak it. From Robert, how do you think Ryan Hall's strategy would fare under Pride/Art of War FC rules? Oh god, I forgot Art of War was a thing. Fine. I mean, Imanari and Shinya Aoki both got away with it under rules that allowed stomps and soccer kicks. I think people imagine that it wouldn't work. But the thing is that if you're trying to entangle someone's legs, them being willing to throw them through your guard in hopes of maybe hitting your head makes it a lot easier. Aoki, his knockout losses have come from diving on useless takedown attempts. He's very rarely been hurt when he's like tying up people's legs. Imanari got hit by a knee from Hansen when he was shooting like an upside down shot, but he did it like towards the center of Hansen's guard, whereas if you watch someone like Ryan Hall, his head always goes outside the lead leg. It's very cautious. I mean, Shinya Aoki was happy to butt scoot in under rules with soccer kicks and stomps. I think people really... They're a great technique, but it is a technique. You really have to be careful with stomps and soccer kicks. They're hard to get off without getting your leg entangled afterwards or throwing yourself off balance. Do you agree that Ronda is way too far behind in striking to ever catch up with the likes of Amanda or Holly, and should go ahead and call it a career? Thank you. Nah. I mean, she's never going to be a world champion boxer like Holly was, but, there's no reason... What she's got is a big right hand, and that's exactly what several others in the division who are called great strikers have. She needs to be sparring with top quality people who are going to punish her for throwing herself out of position and walking in face first. Not a coach who's going to hold the mitts in front of her and then occasionally tell her something's coming back and let her slip. And finally, from Randall, I'm curious what your process is like when you write your articles. How many drafts do you usually do? How long do they usually take? It's a mess. I don't really have a process. I just think of what I want to talk about that day, watch whatever fight I'm going to talk about, take out the cool bits that I like, and throw them in an article, and then I write some jokes around it. Occasionally, I try and do. Well, I haven't done them so much this week. Since things have really kicked off at work and I've had to dial back the writing. But I'm going to get back to it this year. I'd like to try and pick a couple of historical ones a month that I can really research and tart up the language, make it really nice. But when you're doing recaps and previews, all you really have to do is remember what you've watched. If I'm watching every pay-per-view and every fight night, I remember most of what I've seen from people anyway. It's very rare, though it is happening more nowadays with the huge number of people on the roster. Guys get up to the main card and I'm going, who the hell is that guy? And then I go back and watch their fights and I go, oh, okay, I do remember actually seeing this fight. I just had no idea who he was. It's a bit chaotic, but that's the writer's process for most writers, I think. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I was struggling at the start of this. I'm getting back into the swing of things, so I'm sorry if it wasn't the best podcast ever. I hope to have some exciting new stuff coming in the new year, and thanks for your patience, sincerely. It's been terrific fun doing this podcast through the latter bit of 2016, and putting a little bit of myself out there and, letting you get to know me, because this podcast gives me a chance to show the sort of sarcastic person that I am when I'm writing these things, as opposed to the stuck-up high art know-it-all person who doesn't like fights that aren't all jabs or something like that. Anyway, sign up to the Patreon if you want to support the show. Send your messages and questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com, and I'll catch you all next week, I promise. Cheers.